Let's talk about the curious case of Kell Brook. Whenever Terrence Crawford and Earl Spence are brought up, there's always questions on one guy's resume and not the other. Kell Brook is one of these guys that I would argue, and I'll present my argument, has been the same guy the entire time. And we're just using our biases in the echo chamber to prove differently. So when you look at the resume, right, just say you go to BoxRec, say you don't know much about boxing, and I tell you the toughest two guys on this guy's resume is Sean Porter and Kell Brook. And we're speaking on Earl Spence. And this guy, Terrence Crawford, hasn't fought anybody. The first place your mind would go, well, they fought the same people. This guy also fought Sean Porter and Kell Brook. And then you would say, well, Kell Brook was washed at the time. Earl Spence fought a better Kell Brook. Okay? And if I don't know anything about boxing, I would, well, what does wash mean? Okay? Well, wash is when a fighter doesn't have it anymore. The guys that he used to be able to beat, he can't beat. Or the fashion that he used to beat them in, he can't beat them in that fashion anymore. There's some obvious slippage in the guy. Okay? And then I may ask, okay, well then, could you point me to the boxing match or when did Kell Brook start to slip? And this where the conversation will more likely stop. There is no definitive moment in Kell Brook's career to where he started to slip. Okay? Is there age associated with wash? Because we know in most sports, we'll say 35, 36, it's pushing it. Okay? Basketball really it gets you out of there pretty fast because you no longer jump high and you're not you're not as athletic, and the younger kids are coming in and they are, right? You got the Ja Morants and shit, and you just can't keep up with them for long. So when we look at a guy like LeBron James, we say, man, this guy's amazing, especially for his age. Well, Kell Brook is still relatively at 34 the time he fought Terrence Crawford, who was 33 or maybe 32 and some months at that time. He's only a year and something older than Terrence Crawford. So whatever he was going through, Terrence Crawford would have to equally be going through, or at least something similar. But you still would have to point me to a moment to where that age was affecting Kell Brook in the ring. And again, there is no such moment. This is a completely made up storyline to protect one fighter and to criticize the other. So let's get into it. Kell Brook, I believe it was his 15th or 16th fight. And you can check this out for yourself. At that point, in his 15th or 16th fight, he was still fighting guys with losing records, right? I'm talking about guys 31 and 189, right? 24, 139. It's a guy, Ernie Smith, that's on his record 3 times. 11 and 80, 12 and 85, 13 and 97. Okay? Again, I think it's his 16th fight. He fought a guy who was 2-10 and 0, his 16th fight. 15th fight. 16th fight, he fought a guy who was 8 and 12. It wasn't until his 17th fight that he started to fight guys consistently with winning records. And none of these guys were undefeated, but that doesn't mean anything. Okay? So he's going through these guys. He's fighting the Livermore Indus. He's fighting Matthew Haddon, not Ricky Haddon, Matthew Haddon, who had 5 losses at the time. Livermore Indu had 12 losses, 48 and 12 when Earl Spence fought him. And then he gets to the crafty veteran Carson Jones, right? And when he fights Carson Jones, many people think he got beat. And a lot of the British boxing fans were no longer that high on Kell Brook. They thought maybe Carson Jones edged it. It was a majority decision, very close. One judge even had it at a tie. Okay? A year later, he rematches Carson Jones, knocks him out in the 8th. Okay? This is where it gets important. He fights Sinchenko, who I believe has 1 loss, and it's a stoppage loss, versus Paulie Malignaggi. I think it was on cuts. I doubt Paulie knocked him out cold. But versus Paulie Malignaggi. And then he's right in the ranks to fight Sean Porter. And Sean Porter probably thought he was going to run over the guy, to be honest with you. Probably was a little unprepared. He fights Sean Porter, and he's strong as shit. Whenever Sean Porter get close, he would grab Sean Porter ass up, and Sean Porter could not fucking move. Like how he bullied everybody else, could not do it. It was a clinch fest, but he pulled it out. He did the much better work on the outside. And anytime Sean Porter got close, he reached out and grabbed and bear hugged his ass. And Porter could not move. He was fucking stuck. All right? And in between Porter, this is where, again, I want you to listen. He fought JoJo Dan. JoJo Dan had 2 losses. Not that important, but he had 2 losses. All right? He fought Frankie Galvin. Frankie Galvin had 1 loss. None of these guys are world beaters, right? But they're just nice, solid British level opponents, right? Then he fought Kevin Bizier. Kevin Bizier got 2 losses to fucking JoJo Dan, who you already beat. So in between Sean Porter, so we're going to use Sean Porter as the cutoff line. That's when he arrived as the champion. He beats 3 guys at 147, right? JoJo Dan, Frankie Galvin, Kevin Bizier. And then he fights Errol Spence. In those fights, it was 3 knockouts. But prior to that, he went up to 160 and got knocked out his damn self by Triple G. And in that fight, he was winning the earlier rounds. Not really winning, but he was showing a good account for himself. Until he wasn't. In the Errol Spence fight, he was showing a good account for himself in the earlier rounds. Again, until he wasn't. In both of those fights, we got a left and a right eye injury. Orbital bone, orbital bone. Now, many people would say, hey, man, if you broke your orbital bone on one side of your face, it does mess up the integrity of your face, the structural integrity, and you're probably going to break the other side, right? Haven't done much research into that, but that's not important. What's important is the level of competition. JoJo Dan, knockout. Frankie Galvin, knockout. Kevin Bizier, knockout, right? These guys each have a loss. 2 losses, 1 loss, 2 losses. After Errol Spence, he moves up to 154, right? Guess the caliber guys he fought again. 2 losses, 2 losses, and 1 loss. Fought the same caliber of fighters, right? Same caliber of fighters. He took some time to heal. He came back less than a year later. Fought the same caliber of fighters. And guess what he did to them? Starched them all. Unanimous decision. Well, first of all, let's start with Sergey Rabchenko. Knocked him the fuck out in the second, right? Goes up, knocked this guy out in the second fucking round. Then the next fight, he has a UD against Michael Zarafa. I want to read these cards to you so we can see if there's any slippage. 118, 110. Beat him by 8 fucking points in a 12-round fight. Crazy, right? 109. 119, 109. 10 points. 12-round fight. The closest judge had it 117, 111. 6 points. This is a fucking blast out, right? Then he fights another guy in Mark DeLuca, who has 2 losses at the time. Well, he has 1 loss. He has 1 loss. DeLuca was down in the 3rd. Kell got him out of there in the 7th. Knocked him the fuck out. No slippage. Right? No getting old. Didn't look old in the ring. Less than a year later, he's in the ring with Terrence Crawford. Coming off a knockout, a wide unanimous decision, and a knockout of the same caliber of opponents he was fighting prior to Errol Spence. Right? The losses and everything lined up. He didn't get his orbital bone broken in between that anything. Yes, he was a little older. Okay? But we're talking about the difference between 31 and 34. Okay? Not really, no time off, no slippage, not really extremely older. He was the same fucking fighter he's always been. And to add insult to injury, after he fights Terrence Crawford, he fights Amir Khan. Now, we know Amir Khan typically outboxes everybody, then he gets knocked out. We know Amir Khan got a little pop, he quick and everything else. Starts as Amir Khan and retires. It starts snorting coke. But that's something different, right? That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. What we're talking about is there was no slippage in Kell Brook. That's a completely made up storyline to give one guy credit and not the other. Kell Brook has always been Kell Brook. He was never a killer. He was a decent fighter who beat Shawn Porter. That's it. He was a decent fighter who beat probably an unprepared Shawn Porter, but beat Shawn Porter. But even if we look at Shawn Porter had a fucking draw on his record. Right? This is not Shawn Porter's first slip-up. That was his first loss. But Shawn Porter has a draw against Julio Diaz, who it took him 2 times to beat. Julio Diaz was 40-7 at that time. So it's not like Shawn Porter was this terror either. But what Shawn Porter did do is he fought everybody. And he made a good account for himself. So that's what made him great on both guys' resume. And we'll argue about that later if Shawn Porter was the same Shawn Porter. Because Shawn Porter, I could make the same argument. But right now we're just talking about Kell Brook. So in conclusion, if Kell Brook was a killer when he fought Earl Spence, then he was the same killer when he fought Terrence Crawford. If he was solid when he fought Earl Spence, then he was solid when he fought Terrence Crawford. He's always been the same fighter. He's always beat the same caliber of fighters. He came up short 3 times. The Triple G, who he had no business standing in the ring with. Standing across the ring with. No business. Earl Spence. And if you look at their styles, again, what did I tell you that Kell Brook did to Shawn Porter? He grabbed him and held him, right? And guess what? He doesn't have an inside game. So after he got a little tired and wore down, Earl took him on the inside, banged him up. Broke the orbital bone, who many people say, again, because of facial integrity, that Triple G did half the job for him already. Okay? And then he fights Terrence Crawford, who arguably he was never going to beat anyway. Even if we just use Shawn Porter, not even the triangle theory, just look at it. We had one guy who held the shit out of Shawn Porter and got a close decision victory. Then we got another guy who knocked out Shawn Porter. We got a guy who was miles above Shawn Porter. And yes, the guys who was miles above the one guy beat the guy who had a tough fight with him. He lost to 3 good, if not great fighters. Outside of the Carson Jones hiccup, he didn't have any other hiccups. He's always been the same fighter. I'm out.